Welcome to the meeting of the Committee to Review and Assess Zoning and Review the Town's Use of Regulatory Agreements. We'll start with Cynthia doing a roll call.
Members of the committee, Councilor Jeff Mendez.
Here.
Councilor Matthew Levesque. Councilor John Crow.
Here.
Councilor Kristen Turkelson. Councilor Charlie Bloom.
Here.
Catherine Ledeck.
Here.
Ken Alsman. And Chair of the Committee, Bob Schulte.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you.
I just want to do a reminder that everyone make sure that the microphone is on.
Mic's on, everybody, when you talk. Okay. Thank you. I'd like to start by making the following announcement. In accordance with MGL Chapter 30A, Section 20, I must inquire whether anyone is recording the meeting, and if so, to please make your presence known. No one here. Thank you. I want to start by thanking everyone in person and on Zoom for attending and for their interest in the subject matter of the subject matter covered by this committee. Once again, we want to encourage the public to comment either in person via Zoom or by sending comments via email. As we don't yet have a specific email address for the committee, I ask people to please send any comments to Cynthia Lovell and note in the subject line Ad Hoc Zoning and Regulatory Agreement Committee. And she'll send those copies to all the committee members. Her email is Cynthia, CYNTHIA.Lovell, LOVELL, at town.barnstable.ma.us. Couple of housekeeping items. Pleased to let folks know that the appointment committee met recently and voted to recommend Seth Etienne be approved by the town council and appointed as our fourth member of the public to this committee. It's my understanding there'll be a first reading of Mr. Etienne's nomination on August 15th and a second reading on September 5th. Cynthia was kind enough to invite him as a member of the public to attend today, but it sounds as if he may be out of the country right now, so hopefully we'll see him at our next meeting. And my third item was just wanted to mention to everybody, last time we talked about establishing either a sub-page on the website or something on the Laserfiche for including all the presentations and materials that we have. And Cynthia has let us know that she's working with IT to do that. So hopefully we'll get that done. It's something that takes a little time, but we'll be able to get all the information so the public can see that. Yes, Cynthia.
I do have an update on that. Currently, your committee sits on our town council webpage under subcommittees. That's where your agenda is posted, and if you click on your committee title, it brings you to a committee page where your agendas are posted, and any meeting material will be posted there as well. So that is currently up on the town council webpage. Over to the right-hand side, it says Town Council Ad Hoc Subcommittees. Click on that, and all 5 are listed.
Terrific. Thanks for getting that done so quickly. I thought I would just, we'll try and do it every meeting, is just read again the purpose of this committee for those watching on Zoom or here. Again, our purpose is to work with the town's planning and development staff to review and reassess recently adopted zoning changes, review the town's use of regulatory agreements, and make recommendations to the council. I think next would be correspondence to the committee sent in from the public.
There is a couple in your packet that was sent to the town council mailbox, and I printed those out for you.
I'll just make a couple of quick comments. One of those was from Natalie Pittenger, who was a member of the public who spoke last meeting. I want to thank her for sending those in. She put together several of the incident reports that she put together using information from, I think, Mr. Florence's group. Sent us summaries for Hyannis, Centerville, Marston Mills, and Hyannis. And we also received 2 emails from Frances Parks. One was some of her concerns with the form-based code. And secondly, was regarding certain properties that have derelict vehicles and construction equipment. She identified a couple of specific properties in her emails. Her concern was primarily with the toxic fluids that might leak from those vehicles into the ground. Do any of the committee members welcome Committee Member Turkelson, thank you. Do any of the committee members have any comments on any of the correspondence we received from the public? Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to share the concerns that Francis Parks mentioned regarding the environmental impact of all of this derelict equipment and perhaps disassembled vehicles that might be on some of these cars. I share that concern. I think we need to understand that there are environmental impacts from those sorts of activities. So when we're talking about enforcement and the need perhaps to tighten up zoning language so that it's more clear what's allowable on properties, those are some things that we need to think about. So thanks very much, Francis Parks, for your comments.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. I think next we'll move to public comment. Is there anybody in the room today that would like to speak? Seeing none, do we have anybody on Zoom?
There is nobody currently right now.
Great, thank you. All right, I think we can move on to item D, which is continued review and discussion of the regulatory agreement presentation presented by Jim Kupfer and Steve Robichaud, who are both present here today. I guess I'll start by saying I want to thank Jim and Steve for putting together the memo that summarized some of the key issues we discussed and suggested some action items. I think that's a good place to start today's discussion. I guess I'd like to open it up to the committee for any comments they have on the memo and suggestions of other items that we might want to add to that list or perhaps expand or provide more details. So I'll turn over to the committee for any comments. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to add a comment. I briefly looked at this memo that was prepared by Jim and Stephen, and thank you very much for doing that. It's very, very helpful to have the comments all in one place like that, especially since we were all commenting about so many different things. So thank you so much for coordinating all of that. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of having a formal reporting out mechanism. So we talked a little bit about once a project that's governed by one of these regulatory agreements approaches completion and they get their occupancy permits and they're kind of ready to walk away, I think it's important for us to consider having a formal reporting out mechanism. I recognize that staff from the perspective of doing inspections are sort of really, really overwhelmed sometimes with enforcement activities where they have to go out to properties and all that sort of thing. But I wonder if we can put the onus on the developer to make a formal presentation when they're completing their project. There may be things that they've done that go above and beyond what's described in the regulatory agreement. We may not necessarily hear about any of that unless they're actually making a formal presentation back, I would suggest, to the town council, because of course that would be recorded and available for the public to see as well. I think staff are kind of busy and overwhelmed sometimes, so I don't really want to pass that responsibility off to staff. But maybe we can add that into the regulatory agreement and have them do a formal reporting out. I'm just going to make this up, 3 years after the date the agreement is signed, or within a certain period of time after they get their occupancy permit. I'm sure there's a good trigger point that we can identify that we could use for that, because then they could come in and respond to all of the public benefits that they promised and tell us exactly what they did. So we know that there are some inspections that are being done as a project is being completed. You know, we're monitoring stormwater management, we're checking on the sewer connections. We know those kinds of inspections are occurring. But wouldn't it be nice when everything is said and done for them to come in and present the whole picture to us? So I think if it's possible for us to consider adding a formal reporting out mechanism as part of the regulatory agreement, it would make it a little easier for all of us because we don't have to keep asking the questions. You know, individual counselors, where you have specific projects in your districts, you don't have to keep a running list of which ones you have to check on and when. There would be a formal process, and that way you wouldn't have to worry about keeping track of all that stuff too. That's just a suggestion. What do you think about that? Anybody have any ideas?
Councilor Turkerson?
Thank you, Kathy. I think that's a great idea, along with the pre-planning and letting us know kind of what's in the pipeline. It's kind of like from conception to completion, you know, we have a nice streamlined process that, you know, it's comprehensive and has a flow to it, so that we're all in and where, you know, and the regulatory agreements, they bias a certain precinct more than others. So again, it might not impact my precinct, but it's still, I think, important that we all know what's going on. And like you say about sharing the benefits that a regulatory agreement could bring to our town, because that's part of the sales mechanism of why we have this. And it's a good education ongoing. People that are new to this, they're kind of picking up as we go along, because they're hearing, you know, again, from the beginning to the end. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, comments? I had a couple, Jim, I don't know if it's easier if you want to come to the mic or whatever, just a couple things. Just going through the memo, again, I think this is a great model to use. I think, again, the culmination of our work will be a list of recommendations and thoughts for the town council to consider, and I think we can kind of use this as a roadmap. In the first item that you've identified on page 1, there was, I think your recommendation was, committee recommends the regulatory agreement district map be amended by adding or removing certain properties from the map. One of the things I was going to ask maybe for the next meeting, I think President Penn mentioned this, just maybe a little bit better understanding as to what the actual process is to do that. You know, is that a motion has to be made by a council member, or what's the process from a procedural perspective to make any kind of a change, whether it's to add or delete a property? And that may be something that legal needs to weigh in on as well, but I think that would be helpful for us to understand that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We can provide that roadmap for amendments to the map. Just doing a cursory review, it looks like it's very similar to a zoning amendment where planning board provides a recommendation, it goes to town council. With this being adopted through the Cape Cod Commission, it very likely will have to go to the commission for like a certification of some kind. But we can spell that out for you.
That's helpful. Like, I hadn't thought about that, needing to go to the Cape Cod Commission as well, but just to understand a little bit more of the process. Maybe the next version of this, a little bit more color on that as well. On page 2, again, I think Kathy just alluded to it as well, and with some of the comments that Mr. Robichaud made about an earlier start, you know, public involvement. And I think, you know, Steve, you had made a comment about maybe a questionnaire or survey to the council on the front end. You know, that wasn't something that we really talked about in this memo, but there's some more ideas about that, getting the earlier public involvement so that we don't have, you know, the planning board go through a lot of gyrations only to have it turned down immediately at the town council. So I think just maybe a little bit more color on that one item. I like the comments too about, you know, I know it's hard to identify all the potential public benefits that a regulatory agreement might have, and I think item number 9 was kind of a catch-all, but your comments, Jim, in the memo there about looking at the strategic plan for the council to give some thought, I think that's a good suggestion to maybe look at some of those items. There are a couple of things that I think we talked about as well that maybe flesh out a little bit more in terms of setting perhaps a minimum holdback on performance bonds. We talk about performance bonds in there in that last recommendation, but maybe some more specificity about, again, whether, I think Councilor Crowe had suggested, you know, if we have a performance bond, the entire bond is held into everything, all whatever 18 things that are on the list, or maybe we set a minimum. I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, but I think it's the kind of thing the council may want to take a look at. Kathy had also mentioned the use of conservation bonds. I think you talked about that. I don't understand those as clearly, but maybe a little bit more understanding as to what that would entail and how a regulatory agreement might incorporate conservation bonds. And then I think when Mr. Florence was here, we talked a little bit about, you know, understanding that his group is really not here to enforce regulatory agreements, and maybe there's something that needs to be thought about in creating the role of a regulatory enforcement officer, somebody who's responsible, rather than saying there are 3 or 4 different groups that all have responsibility for following up on those items. It might be easier if we had one individual or one group that was responsible for doing that. So just, a couple of thoughts I had, other ideas that were just shared and discussed last time regarding the memo. Any other thoughts, Mr. Robichaud? Yeah.
Just wanted to
Steve?
mention a couple things. I mean, first of all, thanks so much again for the opportunity to speak. And, you said a couple of things that I thought were great that I just wanted to kind of touch on. One of the things I really like about the potential recommendation of Town Council regarding earlier public involvement is the words, the town shall provide all applicable materials provided by the applicant. The reason I like that is because if you have a larger project that has plans, renderings, landscape plans, those could all be submitted from the start as early as possible, because it's so, for me as a planning board member, the difference between words and visuals is huge. So to actually show people kind of what the applicant is thinking in terms of what it's going to look like, I think that would be really, really helpful. Jim and I kind of bounced this back and forth. We did recognize that there are some smaller projects that maybe don't go into that level of depth that the big ones do, and they might not have renderings or as detailed plans. So that's why we didn't want to require that, but just say all applicable materials to make it, based on the application, case by case. So I really like that because that will give people something to really sink their teeth into. The performance bond, Kathy, I just wanted to echo something you said that I really liked, which is, I think we do need to hear from developers, just to hear their side of the story. The last thing we want to do is overburden them to a point where we really kind of discourage things. So, it would be good to hear their voice and find that balance. I can't remember who said last time the word balance. Yeah, and I love that. I love that. So we want to find that balance between taking care of the public and the town, but also making sure that we're not being kind of too harsh on developers, I guess. So I just wanted to say those few things. And again, thank you so much for letting me speak and for your work on this.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I really appreciate your comments. So in my experiences in working in other jurisdictions, the types of presentations that are made early on really vary because it depends on how big the project is, where it's located, how much detail they have prepared. In some instances, it's just a conversation because they don't really they've not drawn up any plans. And you know how it is, it's very expensive to start pulling together those engineered plans. So sometimes we would get to see conceptual plans. So maybe it's not super detailed with respect to what the building will really look like, but it shows the location of the building and how it's oriented on the site and how it will impact, let's say, the natural resources that will be managed around the property, or the location of the parking lot, or, it's conceptual plans, which are obviously not engineered site plans, but it's enough so you have a sense of what they're thinking about. And you can certainly raise a lot of questions based on those concepts that they're throwing out there. And you don't really want formal plans prepared at that point because, you might have to turn the thing upside down and it becomes something totally different based on what the public input is, So you want to provide a lot of flexibility. So you're right on when you say applicable materials or whatever is available at the time, because it might not be that detailed.
And honestly, how wonderful of an opportunity that is to get that feedback in before they get too far, because that can help guide them in the right direction rather than it being done and you saying, well, maybe we could go in a different direction. There are some instances where it's more of a corporate situation and they already have that pre-packaged plan. Walgreens probably has 10, setups that they go with, so they're able to kind of just hand it over. But you're right, there's so many that they're not going to invest that $100,000 in those renderings and plans until they get that initial feedback. So
Yeah. The other
it'd be nice.
benefit to looking at conceptual plans is, from the point of view of a resident, you're given the opportunity to shape what that project will look like. So you have buy-in from the public. So as it is happening, and as they're driving by on their way to the grocery store, checking it out, they may see something that they like or something that they don't like that they can comment on. And I think that that's really useful because you have community buy-in, and then it's our community that's being developed. I think that's a really
Great.
important concept.
Yeah.
Ken, go ahead.
I'm still sort of wrestling with sort of how this happens. I assume maybe you are the first person that a potential builder might come in and to talk to, or?
Yes, so how a regulatory agreement happens. So if they are interested in a project that is in the district and simply doesn't meet zoning, they always, the next question is, well, what is my path to permitting? And so there are tools in the toolbox that are available to certain parties. So, special permits, variances, and a regulatory agreement. So many folk, I don't get many interested parties that come in and are unaware of the regulatory agreement. They're not shaping a project to not meet zoning if they're unaware of the regulatory agreement process. So they'll say, tell us more about the regulatory agreement process, how it's functioned practically recently with myself administering it, is I would talk to them, explain to them the ordinance, much like the presentation that I provided last week. And then I would invite them in to have a conversation with either the planning board chair and the town council president, or if they wanted to just bounce some ideas off to try and meet zoning as best as possible first, I may sit down with them and say, here's the zoning. Now let's go through and you explain to me all the waivers that you're actually requesting. And then I would set up, so not to waste the chair and the president's time, explain what truly are the waivers being requested. And, the goal obviously is to get the least amount of waivers because, zoning is the law of the land, and a waiver is, going around that requirement. So they would provide that list of waivers. They'll provide that project proposal, that concept. The ordinance does require the applicant to provide a draft agreement. So we don't draft that agreement. That draft agreement comes from the applicant's engineer or attorney. So we'll have a draft agreement proposed, concepts depending on what level of concept, and then a list of waivers that are being requested. And at that point, I would bring in either the planning board chair or the town council president, say, what is some early feedback for that? They may give that, they may not. And then it's up to the applicant to decide whether or not he wants to move forward. And if he does move forward and he has all the requirements that are built into the ordinance, so everything it's a complete package, it's a complete application. That's really our role, is to make sure it's just a complete application. Then a hearing notice is published in the paper and through all of our communications. And then a public hearing is opened with the planning board a few weeks later, right here. And so we'll hold a public hearing, and it could take as little as one meeting. It could take as long as a year sometimes to come to an agreement to move forward to town council or not.
So it sounds like even before you sort of get an image of what the person wants to do, you get it into the details of the regulatory agreement and waivers and all that sort of thing. And it's usually the developer who does that, or the owner and the developer, or?
Yeah, so for a regulatory agreement, it's the opposite of what we'll get into probably in future meetings. The zone, specific zoning. This is almost blank slate. This is saying, okay, we can't meet the current zoning. So rather than us identifying what we want, it's the applicant saying, I have a potentially a unique project here, and I want to put it on this site that I own. And so this is my path that I'm seeking, which is a regulatory agreement process, which is a contract between the property owner and the town. So it's not your typical path of a special permit or a variance. It is rather unique. And so, yes, they have the details they're initiating, and then it is molded from there.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go to Jeff first and then back to Kathy.
Thank you. I'd like the early in the process comment, because you don't want to waste people's time. And the only thing is how do we determine what projects are going to do that? Is it going to be size and scope, cost of the project? Because I don't want to put too much government in it, if you kind of get what I'm saying, especially on a smaller end project. So what do you think, Jim? What's your opinion?
Yeah, so in the memo, we talk about at a public meeting, I believe, so a public meeting of the town council, at a regularly scheduled meeting of the council. So really, that kind of truncates the process a little bit. If you were to, if the recommendation was to require, say, an early hearing, that would mean a public notice, which means we're building up 2-3 weeks of lag time, where there's a cost associated with that an applicant would be required. And again, if we're talking about a mandate across the board, that might mean a real small project, like a 2-unit project or something like that someone's trying to do. So I would say, the policy, if you were to recommend it, would be a blanks across the board, that any regulatory agreement that comes in would have to come to town council at a regularly scheduled meeting of the council. You could have it, the council could have it as an agenda item, and if there are no regulatory agreements to take up, then you just move on in the agenda. But it would be, we could actively address these with, at agenda setting meetings to say, we've heard from an applicant, could we put a placeholder on the agenda for them to come speak and present?
Could I add to that, if you don't mind? The volume, in my opinion, is pretty low, where I don't think it would burden either town council, planning board, or the applicant. And, at both planning board and town council, there really is no action item related to it. It's more, here's what's in the pipeline, let's get some feedback. And even though there's not a public hearing per se, both town council and planning board have that introductory public comment at the beginning of our meetings, which is a great time for the public to offer some initial feedback. So I feel doing it for all reg agreements would be the best fit, in my opinion.
And the whole,
Go ahead, Councilor Jacobson.
And now I forgot my comment. My comment was, oh my God, it totally just went out of my head. I'll think of it.
All right, go back to Jeff and then back to Kristen if she
well, if
thinks of it.
Kathy's talking about this, let her comment, and then I'll come back to that after, if you want to go ahead. Oh, Kristen knows.
All right, go ahead.
I'm trying to get you to forget your comment. I know there's not a specific agenda item that you're talking about, Steve, but if we wanted to solicit public comment, would we be able to have the proponent of the regulatory agreement come present to the council, the public make comment, and then the town council make comment? Because if not, then it's just a more of a one-sided, we're saying what we want, we're not getting the buy-in that Kathy was talking about. So I don't know how that would work in the town meeting process, but I think it'd be good if we have that ability at that very first meeting for people to make comment, because if not, we're losing an opportunity right there, and we're kicking the can down the road, and then we're asking them to come to some other meeting. So just a thought.
Yeah, that is a great point. If they don't present that until after public comment, unless you have it the following meeting, public comment on it, so.
Yeah, the way I understand it is, and Jim, you can weigh in, I believe it's up to the discretion of the president.
Right, so yeah, so at any meeting, it wouldn't be a formal public hearing, but if there was a presentation and the council wanted to hear from the public, and the public was present at a regularly scheduled meeting, it's certainly up to the discretion of the president to, take in those public comments.
They could reopen public comment after the presentation? Yep.
Yeah, great
Kate,
idea.
you want to weigh in on that, Kate, or any thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kate Connolly, Assistant Town Attorney. My understanding, and I'll defer to Jim on this, is that the planning board meets first, or defer to Steve as well, to discuss regulatory agreements, then it comes to the council. So the council could certainly, if the president chose, could ask for comments from the public on the particular reg agreement, but then I'd recommend that it go back to planning for further discussion. Is that consistent with your typical process? It can be done, in other words, council can ask for comments, but then I think the planning board would still need to talk about whether those comments are manageable and feasible and, you know, consistent with our zoning for the project.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my understanding is what we're talking about would be really kind of an informational presentation to the public for the first time. So I think it would certainly be going back to the planning board. It would really be very preliminary. I think that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, because again, there's two concepts here. One is that initial presentation, informal, that you just mentioned. So it's up to the discretion of the president to accept public comment for that. Once you get into the official public hearing at planning board, if there were to be, you know, changes that town council wanted to see based on public comment at town council, yeah, they would need to kick it back to us for us to kick those around. Did I get that okay?
Yep, absolutely. And we touched on it a little bit in the presentation. If it were to get through the process and then got to town council and they wanted to adjust things based on feedback, there are some triggers for, you know, amendments, but ultimately, if it was to be tweaked in any large manner, it would typically go back to the planning board for a further recommendation.
Kathy?
So we're not talking about high-volume transactions. We're not talking about 20 land use cases at each one of your meetings. That's what I've seen in other jurisdictions, as many as 20 or 25 land use cases for each counselor. You know, so that's a lot of volume. We're not talking about that kind of volume here. Maybe we're talking about one regulatory agreement every 6 months or something like that. But something that's sort of curious to me about this process is we're talking about an informal discussion with actively engaged public comments to the developer to help shape this project. So when we get to the point of planning board discussions about the regulatory, that kicks off a formal application process. I'm trying to get at this project before we get into the formal process so that the discussions can go on informally out there in the community about a project and what the community wants to see. And then, so I appreciate the interventions and the activities of the planning board and the town council, but this is intended to be informal out, that's what I'm getting at. Try to get the community buy-in for a project early in the process before the formal activities begin, because that's when the clock starts. You know, your planning board meeting occurs, you have so many weeks or months to respond with requested changes to the developer on what they want. I'd really like to try to get ahead of all of that and get the public's input earlier in the process. So once the formal process begins, I think that's important and that needs to remain the way it is. I'm talking about the informal discussions with the community to help shape a project before the expensive drawings are done. Yeah.
Jeff?
Thank you. In theory, I agree with you. But in practicality, that's never going to work. And I'll tell you why. As counselors, as soon as it hits us, it becomes formal. And not only that, but we cannot ask developers that are in the planning stages or the concept stage to start introducing it to the public. Because no matter what we think, that costs a lot of money. It still costs money. I think that we're better off waiting until they have something on paper that they can present. Because I can say, okay, I'm going to build 5 units on West Main Street with a pink facade and a purple roof. The public goes crazy, but then the project comes out, the public's already against the project, it already has negative feelings, then the project comes out and it's, you know, brick with a black roof, just for instance, and you already have half the public against it. If the developer wants to float ideas, that's up to them. But in government, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, But once it starts going through the levers of government, it becomes official. And I don't think it's fair of us to ask them at their own expense to start floating ideas until they have something on paper. Once they have something on paper, then absolutely. Then you go to the public and you say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? You know, but to float ideas, I think is a very dangerous precedent. Because concepts are hardly ever the end result or the end project. You know, and if they want opinion, they can do that on their own volition. They can, you know, put things in the newspaper, or they can have their own thing. But to go through the levers of government for something like that, I don't think is appropriate. That's just what I think.
Bob, you get it.
Well, Ken, back
Yeah.
to Kathy. Yeah.
I just want to say I tend to agree with that particularly from a different point of view. If it seems to me the underlying purpose of a lot of the things that are happening with respect to downtown area, and I'm sort of concentrating on downtown in my thoughts, that you want to make an improvement to an area which you think has deficiencies, that has problems that you want to solve. I think that if you can define those ahead of time and you become more proactive and you're actually trying to attract developers, you're going to be explaining to them what you believe the community is going to want. I'm also a little concerned about, we're going to have the public decide what we're going to build, when I don't see any agreement on anything happening in our country today. I mean, there are so many different pros and cons. It would just chase people away. I want to have it, you know, we need more units. They all have to be low income. No, we need more luxury housing. It just becomes, the public's not going to come to a consensus on anything. Maybe it's different here on the Cape, but my experience has been that way. And it's very important that I think that between the planning board and the staff, they've got a pretty good sense of balance. And those initial discussions are important, and they know when to bring in the council and others to, you know, sort of take the next steps to see if this is something that would be good for the community and the public would, in general, like it. So particularly if I put on my developer's hat, which I don't often do, I think coming in and having a positive response to what you're doing and positive suggestions on, okay, well, let's change it so you don't have to go through a regulatory agreement. Let's make it simpler to do. Or, yeah, that's the kind of thing we've been looking for a long time. I think the council would be pleased to see this happening, and I think the community would feel rewarded as well. But it's to me, it's a more positive thing. I did so much public participation when I was a planner back in California that, you know, I came away feeling good most of the time, but sometimes it was just really very, very difficult. Took a huge amount of time, and as Jeffrey said, it very expensive to go through, even for when we were just trying to come up with preliminary plans. So I'd just be very cautious about that aspect of it, and I would give more responsibility to the planning department and to the planning board to have these, as you described them, informal yin and yang kind of things, so that people would get a better, you know, the developer, the owner, they would get a better sense of what was happening. And then I almost see the regulatory agreement as coming after you've sort of said, hey, this is a good idea. We don't have a contract yet, but these are the things you're going to need to do. Let's see if we can get a preliminary approval for this. Even when I was, you know, I was building a house. You know, we go in and talk to people about what we think we want to do, what are the problems. We get all those sort of resolved. I'm going to have to get this exception, and everybody was, you know, pretty good to work with. Conservation was a little tough, but you know, I think it was a process that was really helpful to us. the end result, I keep going back to that. The end result, the goal is to make improvements in downtown you're going to be dependent upon developers, good developers, to make happen. And that has to be, I think, approached in a proactive way, hopefully, but it can't be in a defensive way. Thank you.
Jeff?
Thank you. The way that I kind of envision something like this is that either on the council level or building department, whatever, we reach out to the public. We have maybe a workshop or two, maybe like they did with LCPC, go around to the different villages. Or, if they're talking about Main Street Hyannis, keep it Hyannis-centric. I don't know. But get the public's opinion, then you work that into the regulations. Instead of having it carte blanche because, I may love it, you may hate it, you may be lukewarm on it, and then we're all eating each other's throats. So I'm about process. I think we need to at least have some kind of formal blueprint with public input. And then if planning thinks it's something that's feasible, then we institute it. And that way we tell the developer, okay, well, this is what we want. Or it has to be one of these 3 things or 4 things or something like that. Because if we leave it, throw people to the wolves, they're going to get eaten. And it could cost us a good developer who wants to try to do the right thing. So I think clarity is important. I think that we need to absolutely engage the public, but we have to go there with, this is what the public wants, this is what we want. You have to stay within these parameters, if you kind of get what I mean. That's what I think, at least.
I think first, I appreciate the comments that Jeff and Ken have made too. I understand the limitations, and that makes sense. Jeff, just to me understand a little bit more, are you saying in general on a specific project, have a workshop, or you're saying in general, like, here's what we want to attract to this area, kind of like what Ken was saying? Because that kind of goes, I think one of the comments I made last time is, have we ever thought of flipping it? Use the process to attract good developers for a specific area or project. I mean, obviously, we're hearing from Steve on the planning side, you'd like earlier, public involvement, but clearly there are some limitations on that as well. So trying to find a way that you kind of compromise, get the public involved. Maybe it's more, like you're suggesting, Ken, identify what we want to have done in a given area, and then use that to attract developers for those type of projects, before we even get into the formal process. But I guess things to think about, yeah.
May I just add to that? So you guys are kind of hitting the nail on the head here. But there's 2 topics really being discussed, and luckily both in your purview. So regulatory agreements are that tool to the side of, there's a property in downtown Hyannis, for the most part, the regulatory agreement district, that potentially, needs to be revitalized. And here's what I want to do. And yes, it's not the town taking the lead on this. This is a property owner taking the lead, saying, you know what, the town wanted this, but it doesn't quite meet the mark, and here's why. The other aspect is the Downtown Hyannis zoning initiative, and that is exactly what you're talking about. This is what we want it here, and we want it to look like this. That is what the Downtown Hyannis zoning is. And so if a developer comes in and says, I want to do residential in this area, and I say, great, here's our form-based zoning. Go through the process and see if you achieve everything that's in that. And it's a weighty document, and the architect goes through it, and they check the boxes down the line. And if it meets what the town is saying that we want in this area, then it's allowed to move forward. If it's not, then there's the other paths of permitting that need to be discussed, whether that's a special permit, whether that's a variance, or if it doesn't meet the mark at all, then we talk about a regulatory agreement. And because the Downtown Hyannis zoning, or my opinion is because the Downtown Hyannis zoning was adopted a few years back now, That is why we've only seen one regulatory agreement, because the town has definitively said, this is what we want, go do that. And we've seen large developments, we've seen small development, we've seen infill, we've seen most abandoned properties at least start the proposal of, all right, I have this dilapidated piece of property and I want to do better with this, and now you've laid out a roadmap for me, so thank you, and this is what we're looking to do. But before that, it wasn't 20 a night, but it was a decent number of regulatory agreements per year that we looked at and we said, you know, why are you applying for these regulatory agreements? And that's kind of added to the conversation of how you got to the downtown high-end zoning. So you guys are really nailing the nail on the head there with, you know, the discretionary, you know, landowner taking the ball and running with it versus the town and taking the ball. I look at it as one regulatory agreement is one tool, and it's reactionary. It's reactionary to, you know, I want to do something, and we haven't planned for it, and so I would like, being the landowner, to move forward with this, whereas zoning is meant to be proactive. This is what we want to do. And so I'm sure we'll have further discussions on the proactive aspects of it at later meetings. But 2 topics, 1 tool here, and I appreciate all those comments, and we'll certainly build more into this memo to address those comments.
Do you mind if I piggyback
Go
on
ahead,
that?
Steve.
What you're kind of describing with telling a developer what you want, I mean, yeah, that's zoning and design guidelines, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So, love to see that, you know, this subcommittee is going to look at zoning to define what do we want. And hopefully when that happens, we get a lot of public input so that we can tweak and massage and maybe adjust form-based code as the town sees fit. And then the design guidelines, as I mentioned, I won't get into that again, but some unbelievable work has been done on that, and we're looking forward to sharing that and possibly doing more work on that. Jeff, just to talk to your point, maybe I can offer to kind of simplify it a little bit in saying that for regulatory agreements, I think Jim and my recommendation here is not to change the process, is not to go to town council early and say, hey, we need a thumbs up here, we need a thumbs up from the public, more to just say, okay, before an applicant puts this on a planning board agenda, it must be read at town council, just so that town councilors are aware and the public is aware. And I think you just leave it that simple, because you're never going to be able to say, don't put it on a planning board agenda until the public says they're all right with it. You'll just never get to that point. I don't think you ever can even get to the point where you say, don't put it on a planning board agenda until all town councilors are okay with it. But ultimately, the goal is read it, get it out there. Town council has a much bigger audience than planning board. So that will get it out to more people and just put it on the map for people. And I know Felicia will make it very clear, public hearing is coming, and she will announce the date and time of that public hearing at planning board so people can say, I'm going to be there, I'm going to bring my comments, and I'm going to be ready to speak on this. So I think just to simplify it a little bit, that's kind of the way I see it, is just get it read at town council. No action item, just get it read. If Felicia, President, wants to take discretionary public comment off, she can, but there's no requirement for her to do that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Again, in theory, I agree with you. But you and I are contractors. Okay? Somebody can explain something to them that we'll understand. There are people on that council that won't. Doesn't make them stupid, doesn't make them dumb. It's just like their occupation. I don't understand because I don't work in their occupation. And I think that it's premature to put something in front of council until we can look at it, until somebody can see it. That's my only thing. And you could be saying to do that, I'm not sure. But I think that it should be at least, there should be some kind of rendering or something that we can put eyes on.
Yeah.
Before we bring it up to the council level and start having public comment. And because like I said, you know, I could interpret something totally different than you would, totally different than anybody would. And at least if you have at least a rough rendering, you can at least see it and put eyes on it. Because like I said, I mean, interpretation is to do with life experience and what you've seen. You may think a 3-bedroom salt box is different than what I envision it. So that's why I think that it's premature to do something like that. Now, I'm all for public input, but we have to show the public something.
I agree with you, and I think from Jim's standpoint, we may be able to define it a little bit better, just to say, when the application, Jim, you know how you mentioned that application is kind of put together and ready? At that point, it could go to town council right before it goes on our agenda. Not the first moment Jim sees it, but once Jim gets it to that point where it's defined, it's clear, there's visuals, before it goes to planning board, it's just, okay, let's stop, put the brakes on it, get it to town council first, then get it to planning board.
I agree with that 100%. That's exactly what I'm saying, and that way the public
Yeah.
can at least see it and see a rendering. They can have an informed
Right.
decision just like we could on council.
That was a key clarification. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you, Jeff. John?
I agree with what you both came up with. I also think that this committee can maybe start working on the things that we want to see downtown, so that developers will come in and say, okay, I can build that bodega or that little grocery store that we need in the middle of town instead of having, if you want people walking, you need a grocery store. And other things, some of the anchor things that we need in town. And therefore, a developer can come and say, I can work something with this property in order to do that. And I think that would be a good idea, is that we come up and say, here's a number of 5 or 6 things that need to be downtown, and then have those and then work around the edges after that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think maybe it's for another day, but the use chart is something new for the town of Barnstable. It's fascinating. It's a 300-page document. We don't have a single use chart in there, and so this was the first time we added a use chart, and we left it broad in terms of the categories. So, like grocery store is absolutely an allowed use on Main Street, but it's not called out as something we allow specifically. It's in retail and commercial districts. So perhaps we could start thinking about those types of uses that we specifically want to call out and say, yes, we want this, that, and the other. That could be a great exercise that we do.
Yeah, and I would say I'm not talking huge Stop and Shop. I'm just talking, bodega, a little bit max bodega thing for the people who live here. It's happens in cities all the time. They have little places where the neighborhoods can go. This is not a huge area, so I don't think it would support a huge grocery store, and also the parking be sort of a difficult area. But if we want people living downtown, that's certainly something they need, and we can do it to a size that fits the demand.
Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, Jim, do you, parking is always an issue to me, and so is the idea of the size of properties. Is there any sense of an effort to get people to coordinate developments or to coordinate their project with a next-door neighbor, or work on consolidating parking in a better way? Building a parking structure, that'll get the public out. But those are the kinds of things that, to me, are going to be very important to forming the downtown in a reasonable, completed project. So,
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot to that question. So first off, in terms of working with developers in a coordinated effort, we don't have a lot of actual, big developers in this area. It's a lot of small local folks that are, have small lots. Main Street, Cape Hyannis is carved up in very small lots, sometimes as wide as 10, 15 feet wide. So that storefront is the lot, essentially, for a lot of folks. So there is, discussion of what your neighbor's doing and how to best utilize that space. And one of the best examples is, in fact, parking, in terms of coordinated effort to share parking in the best way they can, especially with uses that work well together. We have almost 14,000 parking spaces downtown. Need to utilize them better. Need to find them better. One of the first actions we did like 3 years ago was beginning wayfinding. So it was funny we've always had that the Red Cross lot, the South Street lot. We put a sign up that says South Street lot. Now all of a sudden people park in the South Street lot, but they never parked in there before. And they were like, all right, we added a new parking lot. Where in fact all we did was toss up a sign. We could do much better with wayfinding. We started a process with that. It's something that could be an economic driver, I think, for downtown Hyannis is better incorporating wayfinding and all of our amenities, our tourism amenities, and especially parking. North Street parking lot. It's a mess because there are 13 different owners of the North Street parking lot. We own about 40 to 50% of that lot. So that's a prime example of all of us having to work together just out of sheer necessity. But in terms of moving down westerly on downtown Hyannis, there is active collaboration with private property owners without intervention from the town, just to best use our amenities there.
Okay.
Kathy, go ahead.
I just want to say thanks to everybody for this really lively conversation. It's gotten to us to a really great place. And I think that if Steve and Jim can sort of hone in on your memo a little bit, some of the conversation that's been captured, that would be really, really helpful for us. But there's something that is not being mentioned here, and I think it's really important for us to talk about it. Even if it is briefly, it doesn't have anything to do with zoning. And it's the importance of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan defines what we want in certain areas of our community. So whether it's a pink building with a purple roof, it's going to say in the comprehensive plan what we want to see. So that process is ongoing right now, and it includes all of the town of Barnstable, and I know many of us and a lot of the public that are listening today have been attending those meetings. That's the purpose of the comprehensive plan, to define what we want. So the lot consolidation that you suggest, Ken, should be described in the comprehensive plan in the area for Hyannis, that we encourage property owners to work together to consolidate their lots in order to maximize development opportunities. It has to be general, because that's the purpose of the comprehensive plan, but it's supposed to define for developers and the public what we want to see in certain areas of the town of Barnstable, in particular in Hyannis. So it needs to be in there. And we're going through that process right now, so if y'all have missed those meetings, we really need to kind of go to those and make sure that our opinions are heard and expressed there. Because next, once we've said what we want, then the developers come forward and they define what they want to do, and then it complies with zoning. So that's where the regulatory agreement stuff comes in my idea, anyway.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. So I didn't pay her to say that. So we're actively working through the local comprehensive plan, as everyone knows here. But I did want to highlight that we are about to start our next real it's not a formal next phase, but it is really feels like a next phase in terms of we're kind of flipping to our land use strategy mapping. So this is when we're getting to specificity, and I think that's what everybody in our community has been chomping at the bits to really get into is we talk about housing, we talk about preservation, we talk about this, we talk about that, but where in the world are we talking about putting this, that, and the other? And that starts in August, and I really hope that we get a lot of participation. There will be a public participation process for that, but I just wanted to put that out there, that specific process is starting very soon here.
Okay. Go ahead, Jeff.
I don't mean to monopolize time. I want to go home too. So, but as far as the comprehensive plan goes, the way that I personally think we should do it is an inward-outward approach. And what I mean by that is that every village is distinct in their own ways. And Hyannis, I grew up in the Mills in Osterville. That's where I grew up. And it's totally different than Hyannis, where I live now. So I think that each village should have an opinion on what they want in their village. Because, not everybody, but some from the outer villages thinks every building in town should go in Hyannis. Every apartment should go in Hyannis. And it's not fair to Hyannis. So I think that we should do it in the micro first, then go to the macro and have town input on the whole town. So village by village, then town-wide. Because the people who live in that village should have a lot of say on what goes into that village. Just my opinion.
Be careful, Jeff. You may just open the door. I could talk for hours on that, but I won't. John, go ahead. Got a couple of thoughts I want to share, too.
I can talk about that subject for hours, too. I think that was one of the fundamental issues to start that was taken away from the villages, and we wanted to look, from the top down. And I think that's going to run into some real problems with the LCP and other things, is that treating everybody the same, every village the same. If you've been to all the villages, you know they're not the same. And so I think before we get too far, and I've said this to leaders of the LCP and everything else, and it seems to be on deaf ears, is that one size fits all zoning wise is not going to cut it. And it just can't happen because we're so diverse. Hyannis is so much different than Marston's Mills. Katua's so much different than Osterville versus and all that other stuff. So that's what it's going to come down to in the end. And I would agree with you. We should be looking at maps right now. Okay, the public should be on this. And that's one thing that hasn't been brought forward. And I understand that's going to be controversial. But you need to bring the controversy first because that's what's going to end up dragging this thing down if there is an issue. So we need those maps as soon as possible so people can see what you're talking about, can discuss it, and then come back and say, hey, like this part, don't like that part. And I think that's important. And I think that's been lacking so far. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, a couple comments. I agree with what everybody's saying here, and I think what I'm hearing kind of a consensus is that and some of the tools that have been put in place is that we want to start kind of beginning to direct what we want in certain areas in town rather than letting the developers come and tell us what they want to do and find a way to work together. I've got my own thoughts in the LCP. I'm not going to go there, but I do think it may be worth thinking about, Jim, I know you're part of that, but maybe we ask a rep from the LCP to come meet with us at some point too. It's important that we don't all work in silos. I know housing's doing their thing in LCP and we're doing ours, so maybe some coordination of efforts there. Just a couple of things back to the memo I think we're talking about. I wanted to ask, I think one of the things we talked about, and maybe for the next round, Jim, give some thought to, I asked a question a little bit about how timing works within regulatory agreements, how that, it wasn't clear. Is it you have a certain amount of time to get the regulatory work done? Do the restrictions last just the length of the requirement of the regulatory agreement? But just a little bit more color on how that works. And I think, and Kathy mentioned this last time and it came up again today, I was thinking maybe for our next meeting, we do talk about, and you mentioned it, Steve, having a developer or two come in to talk about the regulatory agreement from the other side of the process. And I don't want to get into who's a good and who's a bad developer, but I guess I look to maybe you to give us some guidance with 2 or 3 suggestions that we might invite to come to our next meeting and just talk about the regulatory process from the developer's perspective. I think that would be helpful for us to see that as well. That way when we put all our thoughts together, we're looking at, all opinions. So I guess that would be something to think about. Go ahead, Jim.
May I add, you mentioned not wanting to work in silos. I also attend the housing subcommittee, and I believe that they're having the same conversation about having maybe a developer come in for a roundtable. So I don't know if there might be want to be synergy there. We could maybe do a joint.
I think it's a great idea. Maybe we have a joint meeting, with the developer to do that. Yeah.
And of course, some of us sit on multiple committees, so it'll probably be more convenient to do that. Yeah.
Then I just had, I think, a couple of follow-ups on the topic, one of which from last time, we talked about the enforcement. Mr. Florence isn't here. We didn't ask him to come back today, but clearly enforcement is a big issue, and we wanted to think a little bit about, the recommendations we might make to the town council on how we improve the enforcement in general, more on the zoning. But there was an example that came up, some of the parking. I'll ask Attorney Connolly, I think you're going to do some research on that. Were you able to find any information about that and share with us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kate Connolly, Assistant Town Attorney. I found a little bit of information, but there's still a little bit more that I need to find. Councilor Crowe gave me the name of the gentleman who we took enforcement action against. I have notes. It's a 2007 action, so it goes back quite a while. And I have notes that our office kept on sort of the timeline, but I don't have the actual initial complaint. And the complaint was actually filed by the property owner rather than us filing. And that's very typical. When the town takes enforcement action, either we then go to court to get the court to uphold it because the person's not complying, or the person appeals the enforcement order. And that appears to be what happened here. And interestingly, I do have a copy of a motion that we filed against, the property owner must have filed a complaint for a preliminary injunction to stop the town from enforcing the order. And the property is 828, I believe, Seaview. And Brian Florence had mentioned at the last meeting that the ordinance at issue is Chapter 59, which is about comprehensive occupancy, the purpose and intent to guide growth in accordance with the local comprehensive plan, limiting, among other things, parking. And this property, which I Googled the property, it says that it has 12 indoor parking spaces, but back in the time of the case, the individual argued that he had 6 indoor spaces and he had 12 vehicles outdoors. The court, it looks like it, and again, this is based on the notes from our office, but I need to go to the court to get the actual pleadings if they still have them. But it looks as though, I thought initially that we lost in Superior Court. It looks like we might have won and he appealed, because then it went to the appeals court and then we lost, and the appeals court sent it back to the Superior Court. Sometimes they remanded back for the court to hear it all over again. In this case, at least according to the notes in our office, the appeals court remanded it back to the Superior Court to vacate the order. So it was a very specific denial, and the town lost. And the reasoning, and again, just in the notes in the office, but I want to find the court's decision, both courts' decisions, but especially the appeals court, to find out why they denied it. But the notes say it was remanded and denied because Section 59 of the code, 59.3, is invalid because it was not promulgated in accordance with the requirements of Chapter 40A, and that's the Zoning Act. So I can only guess that that means, well, and the town's motion, again, I don't have the court's decision, but I have the town's motion, says that this was a valid bylaw to enforce a number of parking spaces, and in our opposition, we say that it's not zoning, because the other side argued it regulates the use of your property, so it should be a zoning ordinance. Interestingly, the defendants that were named in the case, and again, I got to check, but the defendants are the Board of Health. So that seems strange. Is it a zoning ordinance or not? And why did the Board of Health enforce it? And it looks like it was adopted in 2006. So I do have the ordinance, and it appears to be a zoning ordinance. So that's why there are so many remaining questions. I need to look into why was it the Board of Health that was sued? The Board of Health must have issued the order, because the plaintiff wouldn't have sued them if they weren't the issuers of the order. But the court's decision looks as though they thought that that portion of the ordinance was invalid, and then nothing was ever done beyond that. So once I get the rest of the pleadings and find out exactly what happened, I might make a recommendation that we amend that particular ordinance, or at least that section of that ordinance.
That's great, thank you. I was going to say, because, obviously it's a very complicated situation, but both Councilor Crowe and Councilor Mendez have talked about this, and others about issues with parking. The public has mentioned that. If there is something we need to do to amend that or whatever to make that an enforceable provision, obviously, Mr. Florence is going off what had happened in an old case, but maybe we need to update that just so that it can be enforced. So
Right, and it doesn't appear, I'm not aware of any other attempts to enforce it that were appealed or where a court issued a decision. But before I recommend any changes, I want to see exactly what the complaint was, what the original order was, who issued it, and why the court felt that it was an invalid ordinance. Because we never, it appears that it hasn't been repealed or amended. Although it looks like there's another section of the ordinance that was repealed, and I don't know what it is, because I only have the part that says Section B was repealed.
Okay.
So
no,
there will
but
be more to come.
Appreciate your update on that, then maybe any recommendations you might have. Kathy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. So at the previous two meetings, you mentioned that there was a parking ordinance in another jurisdiction here in Massachusetts that was quite strict, where they, I'm
No,
just
it was a
looking-
little bit different,
It
but
was-
the
okay.
principle was a very general principle.
Yeah.
And at the time, I gave that example because Councilor Mendes had
right,
talked about,
right.
it wasn't parking, it was a couple of towns out in Western Mass. I was just surprised to see this ordinance because most towns don't have to have it. It wasn't about parking so much as it was car parts in somebody's front lawn. And so the ordinance or bylaw said there shall be no more than 2 unregistered, disassembled vehicles or parts thereof in the front yard of a residential property.
I would love to see that. I would love to see the language in that ordinance. I think it would be really interesting for us to look at.
Okay, I'll try to find it. It's
If
a
you
town
can-
I represented a long time ago, and
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly which town, but it was in Western Mass.
Maybe it's a quick Google search. You could probably
Yeah.
find it. I'd love to see that. Be really
It's
interesting.
very easy to find. Actually, the Attorney General's website is fascinating, and they have everything on there separated by category, by town. So I'll go on and look for it, but that is one way to find it, rather than just doing a Google search.
Okay.
Attorney Connolly, can I ask you a question? I mentioned a couple of the letters that we received from the public. One of them was about, vehicles and equipment and stuff. Can you provide us at the next meeting some insight into what the regs are that we have that help us enforce those? I don't know what those are. Obviously, there are problems with that. I can think of a property on Old Stage that I drive by, I don't know how many times a week, a day, and I don't understand how that doesn't get enforced. There isn't something, but just to understand a little bit more about, what exists out there that we can use to address those kind of problems.
Specifically parking?
It'd be more like, an abandoned Jeep and a trailer truck that's just sitting there, or an old parts of a car, those kind of things, so.
Certainly. I can talk with Brian Florence a little bit, but I can look at our ordinances as well.
Okay.
And see what applies.
Thank you. We have a question from the public, and since we didn't have it earlier, I'm going to go ahead and ask Mr. Schwab to come to the front.
Hi, Eric Schwab, West Hyannis. If you're going to focus on parking, could you also focus on people? So illegal boarding houses, basements, and number of adults per bedroom, or any other metric that, you want to use to define the appropriateness of occupancy in a space. So I'm familiar with one that's 2 adults per bedroom is one that's been tossed around. I don't even know if that's the law of the land. But in addition to vehicles, could you also look at people? Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly, I'm sure we will get to that when we start really digging in on the zoning, so thank you. Appreciate the comment. Any other comments from the committee members? Go ahead, Kathy.
Comment on this memo.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that we talked about that's not included in here, and it may be intentionally excluded by you two gentlemen, I'm not exactly sure, was, so the regulatory agreements that we saw, there were 5 of them, and they were very different. The language in each of those regulatory agreements was different. And I think one of the challenges that we have is every time we're not doing that many of these, so maybe there's 1 or 2 a year, and it seemed to me like it might be a good idea for us to look at the whole suite of regulatory agreements that have been prepared and to come up with some standard language. So you're not making it up as you go every time you do a regulatory agreement. Now, certainly, I'm certain you're looking at the ones you've done before, and you're learning from your experience, and you're either clarifying certain language, perhaps it didn't work so well. But I'm just thinking that even with the enforceable public benefit items that you're getting, I'm sorry, wrong word, verifiable is really the word I'm looking for. But maybe it's a question of coming up with a list of what all those options are, so that when you are negotiating a regulatory agreement, that you can just pull the language right in and you don't have to worry about kind of reinventing the wheel every time you do a regulatory agreement. That was just my suggestion, just coming up with some standard language that you can draw from. Now, I recognize that the staff aren't writing these agreements. It's the developers that are writing these agreements. But in other jurisdictions, I've seen huge databases of standard language that you just pull it in, and then you have a complete document if it checks all these boxes. So it would just make it a lot easier when you're working with a developer if you had standard, already approved language that you could draw from for that. Just a suggestion.
Okay, Jeff, comment?
Just a couple comments. The first one on the holdback on the performance bond, I don't think it's that complicated. You do a third, you know, as the project goes, and then you release the final 33% when everything is complete. And as far as enforcement, I don't know who it would be under, what department, but we need a full-time enforcement officer. We need somebody out there, especially somebody that can work a staggered shift, especially somebody that can work from like 12 to 8 or something like that, weekends, whatever. An enforcement officer or two, like I said, I don't know if you want them to connect to the police department, to zoning, you know, health, whatever, but we need at least one, maybe two full-time officers to really get our hands around the neck of this problem.
Jeff, can I ask you to clarify, are you talking about for the regulatory agreements, an enforcement officer?
No, for the cars and
The general.
overcrowding and occupancy and all that type of stuff. Because like I said, I believe, personally, that's the biggest problem in town as far as, we go right now is the cars and the overcrowding of these places. I believe that's the biggest problem in town right now.
Okay. Councilor Crowe?
I can't reiterate that more strongly. I think most of these problems are exacerbated and easily seen on weekends when people are not working and they're all at the house. Okay, we need somebody who's going to be working Saturdays and Sundays and collecting calls as they come in and going immediately out there to see. Because otherwise, during the week, they go out during the week and everybody's at work, you don't see all the cars. Okay, so that's the most important thing. Are we throwing out ideas for what to go down the road at this point that we can look at? Or
Got that coming up.
Okay, I'll hold that till then.
Okay. Councilor Turkelson?
I agree with you, Jeff, 100%. And I actually had an email exchange with Brian Florence this morning, and I think he intends on bringing forward a request for 2 full-time enforcement officers. So I think that we probably want to be more specific on the council level, what we're finding here, informing what we may be approving financially down the road and hiring, so that it's, like you say, it fits the bill and we're not end up with, Monday through Friday and not fixing the problem and just paying the money to not fix the problem. But I think that's something that, and also based on the information that Eric and Natalie brought forward, it's like, what is the closure and the finality of enforcement? And just, he doesn't have enough help. He literally doesn't have enough help. And I've found that 2 times that I've worked with him, he's been so detail-oriented and so helpful that I would want to support more of the work that he's doing. And I know he's working on some new policies and procedures related to enforcement that he's been working on, and that is due to come out as well. So I think, that we should be supporting that at the town council level.
Sure, go ahead.
And I just think I need to say this to the public. I don't think anybody up here is talking about, I have a 3-bedroom house, one of my kids and his wife lives there, and my mother and father live there. I don't think anybody's talking about that. There's just people that just are so egregious. Like, I don't know, somebody was commenting last week, they got like 13 people out of a 2-bedroom house in Centerville downstairs or something like that. Basement, yeah, I mean, and that's, it has more of an effect than just to the neighborhood, but I mean, resources, pollution, so on and so forth. And we're not talking about if you have, your kids need to come live with you for a while, or if you have some family members that fell on hard times. We're not talking about that. We're concerned about these illegal rooming and boarding houses that are, having as many people as the old Dumfries has in it. So that's kind of what we're talking about, not about families and stuff like that, just about, just people who just flaunt the law. It's terrible.
I would like to add to that. From what I've heard from people who are trying to enforce this sometimes is that everybody's a family member. Okay, there should be, you got a family, but you've got a house and a number of bedrooms. There should only be a certain amount you can have, whether they're family or not. I agree with the family thing. We're not against family, but when you get down to it, everybody will say, that's my cousin, my nephew, whatever. So I think we have strict standards as for how many people in a house and per bedroom, and no matter if they're family or not, you cannot overcrowd a house, overcrowd the septic system, overcrowd the neighborhood, and that's where the cars come in everywhere else. So yes, families is not a problem, but like I said, when you go to enforce, everybody says, they're all my cousins. But still, 16 people in a 2-bedroom house, that can't be put up with.
Councilor Tuckelson, go ahead.
And one more thing along that line is when people are making their houses into illegal, not even a rooming house, but into illegal bedrooms and bathrooms. And of course, the problem is after the fact that what do we do at that point? Do we ask them to rip it out? I mean, they think there's a kind of a sense like, well, it was done and maybe they didn't pull permits. It's maybe up to code. And so now we let them have it. So it's like also we have kind of this ongoing problem where we let it roll downhill, and then the next thing you know, everybody is, I'm going to do it now and ask forgiveness later, and that's not appropriate either. I think if we have rules, there should be an enforcement to that rule, because if not, we just shouldn't have rules.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's clear that, particularly as we get into the zoning discussion, enforcement, I'm thinking we'll probably ask Mr. Florence to come back. That's a little bit more particular to what he's doing, but I think we'll clearly want to make some recommendations to the council on some of these issues. So, and some of them can be suggestions that we've heard. So, appreciate that. Any other comments on our discussions from last week? Then we'll talk about. I think before we go to approve the minutes, maybe we'll do quickly just some thoughts I have, and like to hear what others think about for our next meeting. One, I guess I'd like to. Jim and Steve, if you can share with us some thoughts on a developer or developers that we might have come in. Perhaps we could get them invited to come to our next meeting to share a little bit. And then I think, we want to start thinking about using what you put together in the memo, fleshing that out a little bit more to put together what I think this committee's recommendations will be to the council for items to consider on regulatory agreements. I think once we do that, then we can move to start talking about tackling the zoning issues. And I had some conversations with Jim just briefly beforehand. I just want to make clear to, I think the committee all understands this, but to the public, that this committee's charge is not to review and recommend changes for the entire zoning regulations. That's a task that would go on for a long time. But what we've been charged with is the review and reassessing of recently adopted zoning changes. And in my opinion, recent, when you think about the history of Barnstable, the history of the Cape, that's more than just the last 12 or 24 months. When I think of the recent history, you're probably talking about the last 5 to 10 years, and I think that's true with zoning. It's not like we have new zoning amendments every month. The zoning amendments, we have one every year or two or whatever, and I was going to ask Jim to put together a list of the significant zoning changes that the town has passed in, let's say, the last 7 to 10 years. I know there's been things like the ADUs, there's the home business home occupations, home businesses at the homes. Form-based code is obviously the most recent. Short-term rentals were discussed, no action was taken, but again, as we talk about the importance of looking at what the other groups are doing and not working in silos, short-term regulations affect housing, they affect the LCP. I think, I'm going to ask Jim if it's possible to put together a list for us at our next meeting, that we can look through that and the committee can discuss kind of what are the topics we want to tackle as far as zoning. So form-based code is going to be clearly a big one. Steve, you've pointed out in the past, obviously, there's some real benefits to it, but there's some tweaking that may need to get done. We've heard from people on parking, we've heard on height restrictions. Those are all things we'll look at. We may make recommendations to the town council. And I think it would be very helpful, not at our next meeting, but maybe after that, ask Jim and Steve or someone to put together a form-based code presentation similar to what they did to regulatory agreements. I know I could use an education on that to make sure we understand the issues before we really dig in. So I think, kind of future thoughts, next meeting, maybe meet with the developer, continue our discussions on this memo, fleshing out the recommendations we're going to make on regulatory agreements, and maybe review the list of major zoning amendments so that we can start thinking about, what we're going to be tackling as we move to the zoning. So those are the thoughts I had, but I'd like to open it up to any other committee members, any thoughts you have. If that sounds like a plan, or? Jeff, go ahead.
Thanks again. But just one more thing, and I don't mean do a deep dive into it, but while he's doing this, if anything comes to your mind, antiquated stuff. I'm not saying go back to 1875, but if it just if you happen to think about something that seems to be antiquated,
Like you can't walk your dog on the left side of the street on Sundays? Okay.
yeah, there you go. So stuff like that, just to keep in mind.
Thank you. Am I right? Any comment?
Not about that.
Any other comments?
There we go. No, I was just impressed by what appears to be submitted by Natalie.
Yes.
I frankly couldn't get through most of it. I mean, I tried, but who collects this data? You do.
Mr. Schwab?
There we go. I live in the 3rd precinct, and we have a number of issues with home occupations. And in conversation with Betty Lutke, who's the counselor for that area, we talked about this. I have some experience because I have 2 houses on either side of me that have issues. And we decided to go to Mr. Florence and pull data from health and building inspection. And there was a new system put in place called OpenGov 4.5 years ago. So we have reasonably good data for 4.5 years. So when we got the data, we found that it was somewhat jumbled between health and inspections. And that came up in the lawsuit that was just referenced. It's like, why is health doing this and building is not? So we decided to normalize the data. So what you got was the normalized data, the combined data, health and building inspection by precinct for the major precincts. So if you had a request for other areas, for example, Katuitt, we have Katuitt data if you'd like it. We can also pull specific streets for you. So again, we're able to tailor that data based on your request.
Thank you. It was just, the length of it, the extent of it was amazing to me. And
Thanks for asking the question, Ken. I had one follow-up. I think Ms. Pittenger last time asked if we could get closed date added to that, an additional field. And I guess I'll ask, Jim or Kate, is that the type of information we can get, and how do we do that?
There are 2 fields missing. One is if we got a close date, then we could give you a duration, so we could figure out if particular problems were taking longer to resolve than others. So if getting, the front yard cleared out with cars takes 10 days, that's a different issue than getting 14 people out of the basement, which might take 6 months. So it'd be good to have some duration data. That's why we asked for the close date. But the most important piece of information missing is the resolution. Like, what did you do? Like, what happened? Why did you decide to close this case? Because what we're finding, and this is not definitive, but what we've found is that in some villages, cases are being closed rather quickly without any really visible resolution. And in other villages, the cases are held open longer, implying some form of regulatory action. So we think that the reason maybe Hyannis has more overcrowding is just a supposition. We think that perhaps the reason Hyannis has more rooming houses is because the enforcement's less strict. Sure, we'll come by and do an inspection and issue a cease and desist, but it's not really followed up on. There's no follow-up. So we're missing that piece. Like, we can't say, oh, you're not following up on Hyannis, because we don't really know what the resolution was.
Okay, thank you. Let me just ask before, Jim, I saw you nodding your head. Is that the kind of information you might be instrumental in helping us get, or working with Brian's group, or?
Well,
I think
very
it's
like.
reasonable information, and looking at the document, same thing. I think it seems like a fabulous tool I think the town would want to be using, so.
Yeah, I use OpenGov quite frequently. I imagine we could add those fields if they're not already in there. It likely would be something moving forward, obviously. But I'll chat with Brian and see if we can get that done sooner rather than later.
That'd be great, thank you. John?
Thanks, Bob. Mr. Schwab, when you say home occupation, that was the term you used. Do you mean home occupied by businesses, or do you mean, what exactly do you mean by that?
Specifically, home occupation, my understanding is, which Jim can clarify, is that you can go down to the clerk and pull a DBA for $15, right? You just file online and get a certificate. It says what you're doing. You're a handyman, you're a carpet cleaner, whatever. And they just approve it. That certificate, all that's supposed to let you do is open a checking account so that you can cash checks in the name of handyman DBA. But that record goes to Mr. Florence's office for approval. And my understanding is that there are procedures to consider that DBA request and decide whether or not it's suitable for the area. So if, for example, if you file for to open a pottery shop, and you want to put in a furnace in your backyard, that might require a little more scrutiny. And so there are sort of loosely worded provisions for some of these businesses to go to planning. I don't know how often Mr. Robichaud sees them. I think it's an infrequent occurrence. But there needs to be more than an approval for a checking account. Someone has to look at this request to do business in the town of Barnstable and consider what the potential impact might be on the residential neighborhood. So there was a zoning change allowing home occupations in areas outside of Hyannis that was passed. So it's within your 7-year time frame. But you should look at the flow of the business formations. And just look at the flow to see if you like it. And I would ask Mr. Florence to detail it for you, because it seems to be a little bit under the radar, the way it is set up right now.
It would seem to me that if you're going to use an address for that DBA, that has to be for whatever business you're going to, it has to be allowed in the zone you're planning on doing it from the start.
That would be logical, yeah.
Because the DBA is, I'm going to do business out of this location. Okay, if it's a residential neighborhood that doesn't allow business to be run in those neighborhoods, it should be disallowed.
The regs for the DBA as written are for administrative offices or administrative control. There's no discussion about trucks, furnaces, paint storage, so it's just not in the regs.
Okay, we'll definitely,
The
I'm
other
sure that's
gap
going to be
is
an area we're going
just
to
to add,
talk about.
There's no control for incorporations, so there's no interface with the state. So if you form an LLC, then you can start operating without any declaration, right? So at the minimum, we should consider some reporting from the state on new business formations, LLC, Inc., whatever, so we're at least aware of what corporations are operating in town. And one reason for that is, I believe that has tax implications. So, if you're bringing equipment into the town, operating an incorporated business, then it may be possible to tax those assets in some fashion. And we're not even we're not even aware of them, the way it's set up.
Okay, great, thank you. Jeff? Oh,
I'm one of those who has a DBA I run out of one of my houses, strictly for mail. I don't keep equipment there. I have commercial property in Falmouth. It's an office. So I understand the angst, but what I found is that most people who are running these businesses out of their homes don't even have business certificates in the first place. They're just running businesses. And we have to also be careful about the guy who may bring a pickup truck home and park it at his house after he works. And, I agree with Eric that it could be a problem. It's nothing that I personally looked into, but I also know several of my friends who have their home address as their business, but they don't run their business out of their home. It's strictly basically for mail and put your insurance documents together. That's basically what it's for.
yeah, okay.
I don't think anybody has a problem with that.
Yeah, it's the people who are taking advantage and, yes,
Like I said, most of them probably don't even have business licenses.
yeah. Someone in mind? Councilor Turkelson?
Yeah, I was going to say about the end date in the resolution speaks to my comment about if we don't know what the end result of the enforcement is, and we don't tie that to the laws and ordinances that we have, it's just a waste of time, money, and effort. So I think that's the reality is we've noticed a problem A, we find if there is one, and then it's like, what do we do? And if it's what we do is just let people do, like I said, do it now and ask for permission later, then we need to know that. And I think that would be, do we need more people in enforcement, or do we need to have better ordinances and laws? So I think that's a crucial piece of information that we're missing. Thank you.
That's a good point. And Jim, I understand the limitations if it hasn't been captured up until now, but if you could look into that, because this is something we probably want to start capturing as soon as possible and track that information, so. Kathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one point. We're really lucky that we have very smart, engaged public who provided us with the information in that chart, the normalized data. It surprises me that we can't get that directly out of the system here, the Town of Barnstable system, in a way that's readable. They've normalized it and sorted it so that it makes sense to us, but it doesn't come out of the system like that. So it seems to me like that one of the recommendations we should consider is to ask the town, I'm just looking at you because you're the employee in the room, that the town should consider updating that database so that it's easily accessible and in a format that's useful and sortable how we would want it to be sorted.
Okay.
I just want to say something nice.
Last thing.
I want to say something nice. We have a really good OpenGov team. They're very, very responsive, and they were extremely helpful. What we intended to do was to set up some prototypes for management reporting, dashboards, snap reports, anything that you might want to evaluate the efficacy of your zoning, your enforcement, whatever you want. And we can still do that. So I often professionally have done prototyping of reporting systems for many years, but we just couldn't get the data to do anything intelligent, right? So we kind of stopped and gave you the spreadsheets. But if you said, I want to know X, or I want to know Y, then we could develop, a prototype view of what that looks like, and, you could approve it, and then the IT department could make it. So it's kind of on you to ask for the data visualization or just the data tables that are most effective.
Okay, thank you. I think, as we've heard from other members of the public as well, we welcome new ideas, new input, so we appreciate that as well. Councillor Turkelson.
I'm assuming, Eric, that you've been looking at the data and that you probably already have a visual that you envision that maybe you could share with this committee. I'm not saying that you literally have it done, but that having looked at the data, you must already have kind of a handful of things that you say, this is what we would need to be able to demonstrate on a regular basis to find the issues and problems.
Yeah, there is actually a third data field that's missing, and that's category of complaint. So is it overcrowding? Is it, an auto shop? Is it, the complaints are varied. There were, people are running restaurants out of their houses. They're running discos. In Hyannis, we have discos. You just don't know about it. So we were working on that categorization scheme, but we don't have anything that's close to final. So I hand categorized Hyannis, so I could do some prototypes for Hyannis, and then we could apply them to Centerville and just see how well they held up. But that categorization will be key, because that's, from a management perspective, that's what you're looking at. How many basement complaints? Basements are big. How many complaints about illegal basements are there? How many complaints about too many cars? How many complaints about too many trucks? And we thought we could map the trucks back to the DBAs. That was our original goal, and we couldn't do that. We tried. So there's a lot of dead ends in the data, but we could start, if we had categories that we'd have to work with Jim on, because there'd be presumptions for us to do it in a vacuum. But if we had categories of complaints, then you could start getting management data, management reporting.
Okay, thank you. Okay, unless there's any other comments, just so my kind of thoughts then, just to summarize for the next meeting would be, we'll see if Jim and Steve can make some suggestions. Maybe we can identify a couple of developers to invite for that. Follow up some of the items that we talked about, maybe fleshing out the memo, and then review what Jim's able to provide us with the list of amendments, zoning amendments over the last 7 to 10 years, so we can kind of get our arms around what we might want to tackle as we step into the zoning issue. Any other thoughts? Sound like a plan? Okay. I think the next thing on the agenda then would be to approve the minutes.
So moved.
So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yo.
Okay. I think the next thing would be to discuss meetings in August. I don't know if everybody had a chance to take a look at that schedule that Cynthia had sent to us from Sarah Beal. Wanted to check, again, we wanted to try and target a couple of meetings a month. I'm actually going to be unavailable the 8th and the 9th of August, but I'm pretty open the rest of the month. I know we've talked, this seems to be a good time period for everybody. At the same time, I know we've had a request from the public if we might move them around as well, but everybody's schedules. Did people have any thoughts? The week of the 12th, what might work for them? We could look to the 16th, which again would be a Friday. I think Tuesday, I think Friday the 2nd is too soon. That would be like next week. We probably want to take a little bit of a break. But looking the week of the 12th, we could go with the 16th unless there's another day during that week, the 12th, that people might have available. Thoughts,
16th
anybody?
works for me.
Just so you know, I have to go out west twice next month, and I usually don't find out till 5 or 6 days before I go. So just schedule them. If I can make it, I'll make it. That's all I can really say.
I know I'm not a committee member, but if I may make a suggestion, I'm away next week. I am available the 16th and 30th at this time, if that was,
I think the only reason we wouldn't want to do the 30th is that is
Labor Day weekend.
Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I'm planning on going and having a hot dog.
Sorry, I can't make the 16th, but again, I'm much less important than you all, so I certainly can watch it afterwards. Just, if I'm not here, I just wanted to let you know ahead of time.
Okay.
I also cannot make the 16th through the 21st.
16th to the 21st, okay.
Can
Let's see.
can committee members zoom in? Can they zoom in? I don't know. What are the rules for zooming in on meetings? Can people zoom in? Can you not do that? Just asking.
If you allow a committee member to zoom in, any votes you take that evening have to be by roll call. Am I correct, Attorney?
Yeah.
Let-
Yeah, we haven't been voting.
Sure.
I got you. Yes.
Her microphone is not on.
Yeah, microphone, sorry. Maybe you just need to speak closer?
Oh, like that. I'd have to double check, but my understanding is the town manager wanted not to have any more meetings post-COVID where members could participate via Zoom unless there's some sort of emergency reason for that, and that the public can participate via Zoom, but the members need to be in person. But Cindy's correct. When we were allowing it, that was the rule, is that all votes had to be roll call votes.
Okay.
Let me ask people, how about other days that week? There's a town council meeting on the 15th, so I'm guessing since we've got 3 councilors, you probably don't want to double dip with another meeting that day. But is there anything, the 14th has no availability, but is there any availability on the 12th or the 13th of August?
I'm very flexible as long as it's after 3:30, 4 o'clock. I'm very flexible. After 3, I'd say.
Okay. Oh, microphone, sorry.
After 3, I'm sorry.
Okay. Let me say, I'm looking at the schedule there. This room is available on the 13th until 3 and after 7. We do today. How about Monday, the 12th?
I won't be here.
Charlie wouldn't be here? Okay. Is everybody? No? Okay. All right. I know there have been a couple of other meetings of the ad hocs on Town Council Day. Is there any chance of doing it on the 15th before that meeting?
You won't be able to have a subcommittee meeting in here before the town council meeting. There is a
Good.
rule in the town council rules that says,
Good point, good
No.
point, yep. Okay, okay.
I think we should just book the 16th.
Okay, 16th, okay, remind me, who can't be here on the 16th? John is the only one? And Steve?
I don't know.
Okay. Why don't we look to the 16th then? We certainly will have a quorum either way, but we'll look to the 16th. Sarah, since you're probably listening in, does the 16th from 3 to 5 still look okay on the schedule? I know when you sent this to us, it was as of that point in time.
The 16th is fine.
Okay, great, 16th. So we'll say the 16th, 3 o'clock. And then let's look for our second meeting. Good point, Kristen, as far as Friday, the 30th is Labor Day. Is there any other time the week of the 26th, so we get a second meeting in August, that would work for folks?
27th or 28th is fine with me.
Do we want to do maybe Friday, the 23rd, and see if we could get the developers for that day? So that way we're, it's like, I know it's back-to-back 2 weeks in a row, but, it's a presentation week.
Plus, I agree with Kristen because we want to stay away from the holiday weekend.
Okay.
As far away from that as we can.
I'm fine doing them back-to-back. You want to do the 23rd? Same thing? 3 to 5?
Don't forget, there's a possibility that we would do that jointly with the Housing Committee. So maybe it would end up that day, or maybe it would end up a different day, I don't know.
The 23rd, 3 to 5?
Yeah, Sarah, 23rd, 3 to 5, look okay as well?
Yes.
Okay, she says yes. All right, so for August, we'll say the 16th and the 23rd from 3 to 5. Sounds like we'll have a quorum, and hopefully most everybody can make it. I won't ask people to look at September just yet, but think about that. Maybe we'll have Cynthia send out a doodle poll for September. Maybe we can talk to you about that, kind of get that.
All right, just
Oh,
so you committee members are aware, with the 7 other committees that I do, I may not have the meeting minutes, because these are very lengthy.
Okay.
The last set of meeting minutes was 16 pages long.
Thank you, by the way, for putting those together
Oh,
so
yeah,
quickly.
but it's very difficult for me to do a 5-day turnaround with minutes for approval, so.
Hopefully for the 16th, we'll give you an extra week there, but understand the 23rd. Jim, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
Yes, I just wanted to confirm, so the 23rd, maybe we're targeting the developers. If when we reach out the 23rd, I should offer, and I could reach out to Cindy about maybe doing a joint meeting, perhaps. If it works,
Yeah,
it works.
If that makes sense, sure.
Okay.
One suggestion, Mr. Chair. I think we should get a residential and commercial developer, both.
No, the housing subcommittee. Yep.
And if we do that on the 23rd, Steve would be here. Okay, so we could do that. That makes sense, so. Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
one final point with respect to the minutes, which I could discuss separately with Cindy, but I want you all to be aware.
Sure.
They definitely don't need to be verbatim, as Cindy mentioned previously,
Right.
but they don't even need to be as long as she's been putting them together, and maybe to save her some work, she could do them a little bit shorter. The open meeting law has required more detail than it has in the past, but that's things like you summarize the topics, you don't have to say names of who spoke. They require that if one person speaks differently than the rest of the group, then name that person, whether it's a board member or a member of the public. But other than that, you don't have to get into everything that everybody said, and you don't have to get in that much detail. There are also examples of those on the Attorney General website, of
Okay.
people who've gotten in trouble, boards that have gotten in trouble for what they've done, and then what the AG has said is perfectly fine in terms of length of minutes and details of minutes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ken.
just as an aside, when I used to take minutes at meetings, my favorite expression was "discussion ensued."
That might be a little bit less detailed than they need.
Yeah, I'll say I'm a details guy, but I want to be understanding. Cynthia doesn't do that for just this committee. There's many others, so I want to be sensitive to that. Understand that maybe it doesn't need to be 15 pages, but hopefully we can, get a fair level of detail. So, but understandable. Want to work with Cynthia. She did a great job putting the minutes together for this meeting, so I appreciate that. Any other thoughts?
Second.
Just one point of information. Mr. Alsman had tried to send some comments to me to disperse to the committee before tonight, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So I made copies for everybody that we can discuss at the next meeting. We just can't have a discussion tonight about them, so I'll pass them out to everybody.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a motion to adjourn and seconded, so glad we got done in time for everybody to enjoy the rest of this beautiful day and hopefully a beautiful weekend. Thank you, everybody. See you on the 16th.